Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about gender identity and gender roles. Do kids develop their gender identity, whether they're a boy or a girl, because of what we tell them? Are they born with their gender identity? Where do kids and even adults get their idea about what boys should be like and what girls should be like? So gender roles are our development of traits and interests, what we believe girls should be like, what toys girls should play with, what toys boys should play with, just those stereotypical masculine and feminine roles. So, there are kids, especially around age 3 or so, have really strong ideas about what boys and girls should be like. So around age 3, kids really start to understand the difference between boys and girls, and they're pretty stubborn about those differences. They think those differences are really important. And where do they get those ideas? Do they get those ideas from their parents? Do they get them from television, advertising, schools? Probably lots of different places. However, it does seem like there is something about our gender that a lot of times we're actually born with. So even very young infants seem to have gender specific toy preferences. So girls like girl stuff, boys like boy stuff. And they haven't been taught that. They are not even verbal yet, and yet they seem to gravitate towards those kinds of things. Gender nonconformity, we talked a little bit about this in sexual orientation. If you watch that video about sexual orientation, that gender nonconformity in childhood, if you have a boy that really likes girl things, often can indicate a different sexual orientation later on in life. This is an interesting study that was done with monkeys, and what they did was they took a huge pile of toys, girl toys and boy toys, and put it in the middle of a play area where the monkeys could play, and just sort of observed which monkeys played with which toys. And what they found was that the male monkeys played with the boy toys, the girl monkeys played with the girl toys. So they said that this really sort of demonstrates that there's a lot about our gender identity or gender role that is sort of predetermined, that we're born with that. This is a kind of a sad story, I think. There's some parents in Canada that had this little baby in 2011, so he's 10 years old, or she's 10 years old now. And they named the baby Storm, and they didn't tell the baby, and they didn't tell anybody in the family whether it was a boy or a girl. They thought that, the kid could just make his own choice, his or her own choice later on in life. Do you guys think that this is a good idea? I mean, I think our gender identity is really important. It's an important part of who we are, whether we identify as a boy or a girl or transgender. That it's important that we start to explore that and understand that from an early age. And we're going to talk about a case where you'll really understand that this is really important. They're taking this young child. When do they think this child should be told whether it's a boy or a girl, or understand whether it's a boy or a girl? And, if this kid goes to school, is he going to get bullied? Or is she going to get bullied? I keep saying him, but I don't know. And could it cause some different issues for the kid? Probably. Is this a fair thing for parents to do to a child when the kid doesn't have any choice in the matter? And, is this abusive? In some ways, I think it is. I think that it's not the best way to handle a child's growing up, and they think they're doing something good. I don't think it's right to use your child as a social experiment. One thing, like Piaget observed different kids, but he didn't try to manipulate their environment to see what was going to happen. And I think that this is kind of sad for this particular kid. So she is age 10 today, and supposedly still hasn't been told what their gender is. There's some reports that she's identifying as a girl, but it's kind of mysterious because the parents are living off the grid somewhere in Canada, and there's not a lot of information. She has an older brother. Storm has an older brother named Jazz, who's a boy identifying as a girl. So, do you think these parents are messing up this kid? I don't know. So this is a really sad case that happened around in the 1960s. It's the case of Bruce Reimer. So he was one of two twin boys born, and I don't know the exact date, but somewhere in the 1960s, to his mom. This is a picture of him and his brother with their mom, and he was accidentally castrated during circumcision. I always have lots of male students in my class cringe at this, and it is kind of cringy. They were using some sort of new technique to circumcise them, and the doctor slipped with it and cut off his penis. So they didn't know what to do, and they didn't have real reconstructive surgery at that time. So the parents were advised by a psychologist named Dr. Money to raise Bruce as a girl. They said it'll be fine. He'll never know the difference, and we'll give him some hormones. Let's change his name to Brenda, and dress him as a girl, and raise him as a girl, and everything will be fine. So from age 2, this is a picture of him at age 2 dressed as a little girl. But, he never felt like he was a girl. He wanted to play with his brother's toys. Even the kids at school didn't really see him as a girl. They called him caveman and gorilla. And this really tells us that gender identity is not something that you can just change by changing the environment, that it really is something that we're born with. And so, they made huge attempts to try to change this, and yet they were very unsuccessful. He always felt like he was a boy, and never felt like he was a girl, despite the hormones and despite, being treated as a girl. Oops. At age 14, they actually did tell him what happened, and he asked to be reassigned as a male. And actually, there was the ability to do that then, so they did reassign him as a male. But unfortunately, he killed himself at age 38. So it really stresses the importance of how important our gender identity is to our psychological well-being, to who we are. And even though he was able to change that, it doesn't erase all the traumatic things that he went through in his childhood. So really sad case, that really proves that your gender identity is not just molded by your environment. There are definitely biological and genetic factors that contribute to your gender identity. So gender dysphoria is where you actually feel like you're the wrong gender. You don't feel comfortable with the gender that you've been assigned. And we're going to talk a little bit about transgender and the difference between transgender, transsexual, and transvestite, because I think all these terms are often sort of thrown around. So transgender means that you feel like your gender, your assigned gender, doesn't really fit with who you really are. Chaz Bono, who's Cher and Sonny Bono's child, was born a little girl, and he said, it's like the gender in your brain is different than the gender in your body. I'm going to put a short little video clip of the trailer for this movie called Becoming Chaz, and this was, it's 4 or 5 years old now, but it talks about his transition from being a girl and transitioning to being a man. And I think a lot of people are torn about their gender, and there are many people that choose to have the surgery. The surgery has only been fairly recently available, and insurance even covers it sometimes. There are other places all around the world where transgender and transgender surgeries are pretty common, Thailand being one of them. And it's interesting to see if people will be content and happy when they have this surgery, and if this fixes that. So we'll see, but there hasn't been a lot of research, there hasn't been a lot of availability of the surgeries yet to really find out the answer to these questions. But just like Bruce Reimer, people that are transgender are somewhat tortured by their gender identity, and we need to be pretty understanding and sympathetic to them and compassionate towards them. This isn't something I don't think anybody would choose, to do. It's definitely something that they feel really strongly about, and I think that it's really worth paying attention to what people that have transgender say. We look here at Bruce Jenner, and he's now Caitlyn Jenner. You think about him being this world famous person. He was on the Kardashian show. He had more money than he ever needed, and yet this part of his identity was so important to him that he was willing to, put up with all the public scrutiny and everything else surrounding it. So, I think that we have to respect that people that are transgender and don't feel that they're the right gender, we have to respect this is something really important to them and something that they feel really strongly about. Why would they turn their life upside down just because, for some whim? And it's not a whim, I guess is what I wanted to say. So transsexual, these terms kind of get thrown around sort of interchangeably, but a transsexual is somebody that is actually transitioning to either socially living as that opposite sex or maybe physically transitioning as well. So Bruce Jenner and Caitlyn Jenner and Chaz Bono here too would be considered transsexual as well. And people that are transsexual, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've had physical changes to their body. They could have, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have. So transgender means that you don't feel you're the right gender. Transsexual means that you're transitioning to that other gender. And then transvestite is a totally different animal altogether. So transvestites are actually homosexual men that just like to dress as women and like to have a lot of fun with it. They call them drag artists now, drag queens. RuPaul is a show that's on TV where they have a lot of drag artists, and it's really a fun, interesting show. But these are people that are not necessarily unhappy with their gender assignment. It's just something fun that they like to do, and they're not unhappy with their sexual orientation either. So it's not a disorder. It's just something, and that term transvestite sounds like a disorder, so maybe we shouldn't even use that term anymore, because there is a disorder called transvestic disorder, but it's not what we think of as a transvestite. It's where it's usually a heterosexual guy that likes to cross dress for sexual pleasure, and oftentimes it interferes with their relationship and causes trouble, and it's distressing, and so they might come into therapy for that. But it's a totally different thing. So just wanted to make sure that you understand those three different trans terms, and hopefully you'll learn some compassion towards people of different gender identities. Thanks.